In part 3 of the lecture, we look at that concept of sovereignty and what does that word sovereignty mean. It's probably a word that you've heard a lot, but what does that actually mean? Well, as I said, sovereignty means that a state has exclusive authority over the territory within its boundaries. So, under international law, a state has exclusive authority over the area within its borders. However, the other idea of sovereignty, the corresponding idea, is that a state cannot interfere within the territorial boundaries of another state, because to do so would violate that other state's sovereignty. So states have exclusive authority over matters within their borders if they are a sovereign state. But there is a corresponding part of that that says that means you cannot interfere with the affairs of another state. But of course we know this happens pretty regularly. So for instance, the United States has been active, its military has been active in the state of Syria for a year now at the time of this recording, and probably still be there at the time you're watching it. They were not invited by the state of Syria, unlike the Russians. So to what extent can a country operate within the borders of another country without violating those sovereign rights? Well, we can look at as a rationale that the United States ultimately has the right to defend itself. The United States believes that the elements of ISIS that were active in Syria needed to be eradicated. It did not appear that Syria had the capability or the power or the will to eradicate those elements, so therefore the United States sent its military to do so. But of course, this question of to what extent can a state exercise its powers without violating the sovereign rights of other states, that comes up in the law a lot. It comes up in the news a lot. You can watch that. When we talk about territory, and again we've mentioned territory a number of times, there are actually 4 species of territory. And the first is sovereignty. This is territory that is owned by a sovereign state. Another type of territory would be a territory not owned by any state due to its special status. And the best example of this in the modern world, of course, is Antarctica. The members of the international community have jointly agreed that Antarctica is not subject to ownership by any state. You cannot go plant a flag in Antarctica and claim it for your state. So this type of territory is incapable of ownership because of its special status. There is another category of territory that says that its territory is capable of ownership but is not yet under sovereign control. And this is a doctrine called terra nullius. And what terra nullius says is this territory can be owned, but at this point there's no sovereign who is exercising control over that. This concept of terra nullius is what fed most of the colonial era, especially in Africa, in which the international community declared all of Africa to be terra nullius and therefore open to whichever country was capable and had the desire and the money to colonize those areas. And finally, we come to the territory that cannot be owned by any nation. Again, an example of that would be Antarctica, incapable of ownership. There are methods for acquiring sovereignty over territory. We're not going to spend a lot of time on these, and these are covered more fully in your book, but you should look at them at least. Historical perspective, the idea that exclusive occupation for an extended period of time gives you sovereignty over a territory. Conquest, this is the historical method of establishing sovereignty. You conquer a country, a territory. We could have a cession, an international agreement that deeds territory from one nation to another. Obviously, you've heard of the Louisiana Purchase. That was a cession of territory from France to the United States. Prescription is a concept in the law that says as long as nobody's objecting and you're occupying it, then it may eventually become your territory. And then we have accretion, where there's new territory being formed every day by volcanic processes, and therefore that territory can be augmented by new formations of land. Now, accretion what we can see now is that there can be such a thing as artificial accretion, and we're seeing much of that in the South China Sea. And again, I refer you to the presentation on the South China Sea to see how accretion, this ancient concept of how to acquire sovereignty, is relevant. Here we are deep into the 21st century. Title to territory could be acquired in other ways. Renunciation, a nation could give up its title to its territory. Victors of war could jointly decide who has the right to territory. We saw this after World War I and after World War II. We could have claims decided by judges or arbitrators. And again, if you watch the South China Sea presentation, you'll see that adjudication is a means of establishing sovereignty over territory. So in conclusion, what did we learn today? We learned there's 4 elements to statehood, that self-determination is an important concept, and especially the tension between self-determination and territorial integrity. And finally, the principle of sovereignty includes limitations. There are limitations on the concept of sovereignty. And that's it. Thanks.